Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Katie Chitrakorn. I'm Retail and Marketing Editor at Vogue Business, and I'll be moderating today's discussion on innovation in tradition, the changing rituals of retail, which is hosted by Regent Street and St. James's. I'm delighted to be joined by four experts today, and these include Matthew Drinkwater, Head of Innovation at the London College of Fashion, Madeleine Macey, CMO and Acting Creative Director of Liberty, Henry Hales, who is the founder of the menswear brand SIRPLUS, and last but not least, Katie Barron, who's Director of Brand Engagement at Stylus, a trend analysis company. And within this talk, we'll explore how brands and retailers are innovating and what the shopping experience of the future could look like. As stores, reopen across the world, not just in the UK, what do you think will be some of the biggest changes we'll see in a month ahead? This could be a question.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because following from what the guys are saying, kind of looking at what's happening generally, I think something that's actually really exciting and positive that's come out of this situation is the kind of human factor that's come out of this. And because, as you mentioned, people have having to been kind of repurposed online tools that they've had before, look at their digital channels in a new way and look at how you use that to connect with your customers. And I think some of those tools are going to be things that are going to be really key to what you might call like the opening ceremony phase of people kind of discovering the joy of coming back into store again. So, for instance, I think something that I know for sure that's been doing really well is all the kind of virtual consultation tools that you have. So the type of tools where, for instance, you can jump on your phone or your laptop and as a consumer, you can connect to somebody in store, so a sales associate. Now, when I think people go back into stores, those type of tools are going to be amazing because they're going to allow the brands to kind of think about having maybe bookable brand time, for instance. So if you're a shopper, you can kind of say, if you're a shopper and you're like, you know what, I really want to go back into store, which a lot of people really do. A lot of people are really sort of chomping at the bit to have that sort of delightful experience again. You can use those kinds of tools to say, actually, I want to come in store, but I want to know that the type of things that are in there are the kind of things that I could, I want to look at. I don't want to waste my time coming in. Or I'd like to know that maybe there aren't loads of people in the store. So there are those sorts of tools that are kind of these virtual sort of remote access technologies that are going to be super useful for kind of creating an environment.
No, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because I think also historically you've seen kind of like brands be quite reliant on their physical stores for a majority of their income, and then e-commerce or digital be kind of like a supporting act. But I think simultaneously now what you're also seeing is a lot of the sales or a lot of the activity happening online, and in a sense physical retail becoming like, in a way supporting what's happening online. What are you seeing at the moment, Matthew, as like an expert in technology? Kind of like, what does the shopping experience of the future look like for you?
So, I mean, I think to agree with what everyone has said, this is kind of a forced behavioural change. This is something that actually the industry desperately needed. And if COVID is going to prove anything, it's that pause and the effect of pushing people within the industry to think differently. That point of the physical store being the end of a chain in a consumer's purchase is something that has been kind of legacy thinking, and we've needed to force retailers to think differently, to experiment with new technologies for so long that has been so resisted, and now they simply have to think about that and begin to embrace it. There is no other way. Stores are closed, and e-commerce is clearly the only way that you can engage with consumers right now. What I would say that means for the future is that kind of our mission to digitize every part of the retail cycle is something that retailers will have to consider. And what I guess I mean by that is that alongside physical retail, obviously e-commerce plays a part, but what else is there that goes beyond what currently exists? And I think that's where we at the college are beginning to look at what new business models does this situation begin to encourage? What can we begin to see as something that could be new and exciting? And purely digital commerce, purely digital product is something that we think could be a result of this. So
yeah, I'd love to jump in there as well, because I think alongside the product itself, it's interesting if you think about it, when Matthew said that idea that the store is like the final point. I think that's the really exciting thing. And we're going to see this loads with Fashion Week as well. People thinking about how their content, the content they create for one channel, how it lives in other places. So it's almost like thinking of the store, thinking of all the points in your brand ecosystems, whether it's your apps or your pop-up stores or your physical stores or your online space, all of these things, your chat bots, anything, thinking of them as in a sort of circular space, or even like a sort of, Matthew will like this, a sort of virtual sphere, if you like, and thinking about how those things fit together. So for instance, it's, for some of the stuff I've been looking at recently is some really lovely technologies where, and again, they can be quite practical or very creative, where you could go into a store and as a shopper, you can go in and you can take your mobile phone, and without kind of going into to tech too much, you can kind of do a transference from the screen onto your phone. So that could be through a window, or it could be through a screen that's in store, and you can actually take the material with you. So if you think about that from a practical level, if you have people at the beginning of leaving lockdown that are nervous about being in a store for too long, you can just take that information with you, then look at it somewhere else when you get home and you feel more safe. Then you think about it in kind of more creative ways. People might be spending a long time in a store using their phone to control a screen, to feel like they have more control over the environment creatively, to take that piece of information with them, to share it with a friend, to come back to it later. So it's all about that, almost that kind of thinking about having digital layers maybe within the store, whether it's on a screen or much more immersive technologies.
Can I interrupt? Because I think it's really interesting that we need to remember that these are people that are going to be coming to store next week. And what you're talking about is some brilliant future technology that's going to have to really bed in and have to be a real cultural change.
But there are some of these things already being deployed in supermarkets, for instance. So some of them, that's why I'd like to bring it up, really, because some of these things are not quite as wild as you may think. So there's Spar supermarkets in Holland have been using these, where you can kind of go in and you can touch on a QR code, and you'll be able to join a virtual queue, or you can book in from home to do it. So some of these things, I know some of them sound kind of quite far out, and there are some things that are quite wild and very futuristic. But some of these things are using just kind of quite regular app technologies, and all you really need is a QR code. So I think it's kind of why I totally respect what you're saying in terms of sort of things being too futuristic. There are some of these things that people literally have on the phone in their pockets already, that are not quite as complicated or as expensive as you might think.
But let's not forget human interaction.
Well, yeah,
that's actually what a physical store can give. So everything has a different role. So e-commerce and social has a role, and this role is going to become far more important. It has to be about service. It has to be about deliverability. It has to be about depth of offer, that things aren't sold out. When I'm online shopping, I'm shopping with a different impulse. If I'm going to make the effort to go to a shop, stand in a queue, have my temperature taken, all these things that have to happen, we mustn't forget, and that's our responsibility as retailers, it's also about the experience. So when you come into the store, you are part of a community, and you are part of a emotional touch point, even if that is 2 meters away for a while, that we mustn't forget. So the roles are really important, and one has to live with the other. Wouldn't you say, Henry?
Yeah, I was going to say, whilst we're all experimenting with tech, once we've got the procedures in place to make sure that our shops are safe, like always, the most important thing for our shops to actually start making any sort of money and giving a good brand experience is that the people in there are likable, well presented, and just there with the sort of masks and saying, I know this is a bit weird, but we've got to, just charming, friendly people. Because if you go in and have a laugh with the sales guy and you like what you're wearing, you're likely to come back. All of the store staff know their customers almost like friends. In non-COVID times, you would have a beer with them and have a chat, and ultimately you can, whilst this is a lovely Grandad shirt, I think, you can get another Grandad, a pale blue Grandad shirt from other places, really. And I won't bore you with the details of why I think this Grandad shirt is unique, because I think it is. But ultimately, there are others out there. If you liked Simon in Portobello, and you had a good rapport with him, then you might like to go and buy another one from him. And
you know what I think so interesting about what you're saying is that I actually totally agree. And I think the point I'd want to make here is that some of these technologies are great because they actually free up a better human store experience. And I think that's a really important way for me thinking about tech. I think it's that idea of, being able to kind of join a virtual queue, being able to book for once you get into the store, because that means once you get into the store, you kind of almost feel like you've been kind of freed up, almost like having a kind of like returning to the salon experiences.
We've seen for so many years kind of a fear of embracing technology and that it's replacing that human interaction. What's become really clear over the last few months is that retailers are going to have to diversify their portfolio. And we're not talking about replacing stores or physical product, but we need to find something to supplement it. Because if there's any lesson here is that being overly reliant on single channels is going to lead to problems in the future. And that, that need to look at different ways of working is being intensified. So I think there are enormously exciting possibilities ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Henry, one of the things that that came out of the Credo conversation is that they had a real kind of fangirling or fanboy situation where you have people that online were using these virtual tools and they'd be talking to someone and then all of a sudden they'd realise that it was a particular store manager. And they'd be kind of thrilled because they'd be like, oh my God, but you're the store manager from Bleecker Street. And they'd be absolutely over the moon. So I think, funnily enough, so you'd almost have the people in stores kind of developing almost like mini broadcasters, their own kind of personalities and their own channels. And it was so helpful for the brand because the staff felt really empowered, because they felt like they were kind of these mini stars and they were really valued and they had that connection with the consumers. So as Matthew said, I think a lot of this is sort of thinking about interweaving. We all live to a certain extent physically and digitally now. So it's sort of thinking about it in those terms rather than pitting them against each other, I think.
Mm-hmm. Out of interest, it's probably the most question everyone's been asked and not so relevant to this discussion, but do we feel that from now on things are going to ease out and ease out? Or, for instance, at Liberty, are you guys thinking the measures that we put in place now will be here till post-Christmas? What's the time horizon?
We are using governmental guidelines and common sense. And I think that's all that anyone can do at the moment. We're definitely investigating and working towards the digital accompaniments to service, because that is definitely part of the future, undeniably. And I do think those things can be really helpful. And the point is, it's about future-proofing. And future-proofing your business means being able to be agile. So if we have another lockdown, heaven forbid everyone stays well, and that isn't the case. But how can we make sure that when we're able to continue as a business and be able to serve our customers in the right way and still give that level of community and experience, whatever the outcome? And I think that's really important. So being able to be agile, I think that's what we're trying to achieve.
I think what you've all said about kind of using technology to blend that personal experience while making it fun and convenient and personal, I think it's all really interesting. I think it's definitely progressing at different paces around the world. I mean, for sure, Katie, what you were saying with the QR codes, that's been widely adopted in China. You have stores that are operated without any people. In Hong Kong, you have stores where you can have a client card, and essentially that card has all your details, like your top measurements, your lower, like your bottom size, everything. And when you go into a shop, you just give the person that card.
I don't want my bottom size on a card.
Not your bottom size, like what your desired thing is. But the idea that they have to bother you to ask you for your size all the time, it's just there. And obviously, it's only the salesperson can see it. It's an interesting way of communicating that doesn't exist in the Western world. But I guess what we are already seeing here, that's not in the crazy distant future, is that, along Regent Street, along St. James's, you have Burberry, for example. They're in their stores, they've added so-called digital identities to their clothing with RFID tags. They recently partnered with Google on their AR search tool. So the idea is that you can Google search for a Burberry item on your phone and then view the product at scale. So you could have like a Burberry bag on your lap, but it's not really there. You can just see what it looks like. Tommy Hilfiger, they've also got interactive screens, the ones you were talking about, Katie, also the customization bar and smart changing rooms. These already exists. And I guess, like, Matthew, maybe I was wondering, do you think this is something that all retailers should be offering in the future?
Yeah, and it's something that should have been offered, as long as 5 years ago. It was possible to create really photorealistic digital content that consumers really engage with. So we ran A/B testing on AR content in the college maybe 6 years ago, and saw click-through rate on 3D models to be, depending on product, anywhere between 20 to 40% higher than traditional flat imagery. And so it begs the question, where is this? And maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that was quite expensive to create that kind of content. Now it's incredibly affordable, and you can create digital content and 3D content at scale just through your mobile phone. So it is incredibly simple to begin to create more immersive, interesting experiences for consumers. And kind of my hope for this is that it forces experimentation on too many retailers, which has been too predictable for too long. And that excitement and joy that everyone wants to have when they go shopping is what you can use new technologies to create. So I think what I'd love to see from that is kind of a sense of experimentation from retailers, because consumers really respond to it.
Yeah, I was going to mention, there's a couple of things here. One to do with kind of context, and one to do with community, because that's clearly a super important discussion at the moment. And I think context, being able to potentially look at a product and then say, okay, I can see this product's in front of me, but actually I want to be able to see, using virtual technologies, what are the colours, and can I turn it around in front of me in a colour that's maybe not in the shop? Or maybe what did that look like when it was walking down the catwalk, or in any other kind of, or in an ad campaign? I'd like to have those things kind of pulled up in front of me. And I think those things are really important as well, for people that are thinking about customers that aren't maybe in kind of what you call a tier 1 city, that are maybe out in, not in a London or a Paris or a New York or a San Francisco, thinking about the kind of excitement that can bring to shoppers in those types of places. But also things relating to kind of how you use technologies to create kind of more of a sense of a community. And at the moment as well, if we're thinking about the kind of what we call sort of safe social, people people wanting to get back into stores but being nervous about it, which I think is probably where we're at the moment. I know, friends in sort of Austria and Italy sort of saying people are really keen to get out, but they don't really know how to behave when they're out. So they're a little bit safer when things are quieter.
Well, could we do a quick straw poll? Sorry,
go on.
You, Madeleine.
I was going to talk about community, so I'm sure that will come up. I think it's a really interesting time for that.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because already during COVID-19, when nobody can go out, people are migrating online. You're really seeing brands build on that community online, all these kind of like virtual challenges and like games and tutorials that are happening on platforms like Instagram. Like how are you approaching this offline, and like how are you integrating into what Liberty is doing?
So at Liberty, we've actually always had the most amazing community, and we have a loyalty program that has almost 1 million people on it, and then we have within that a really, it sounds close-knit community because it's such a big number, but actually people are very emotionally attached to Liberty, and we've always embraced many different it's ageless. I mean, you can be a child to a student to an 80-year-old, and everyone could be stood in a queue at Liberty. It's completely ageless. So we definitely talk to our community in a big way, and we also embrace it. And what's really interesting is at this time, people are looking to community even more. And there are many things going on in the world right now, many upsetting things. And we need to be hyper aware of kindness and that sense of looking after each other and the platforms we have, and how we can maybe influence with the platforms that we have. We're not a brand that has a vast amount of money. We're not able to turn over and say, here is a massive contribution to this cause, and here is a massive amount of money to turn a digital space into something else. But what we can do is we can say, we believe in this, and this is how we want to treat our staff. This is how we want to treat our customers. This is how we want to treat our local community. And this is how we want to use our platform to be able to say constructive things and to help educate, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that you can't just be a shop. You have to be able to project a lot more than that and offer a lot more than that. It's not about just taking people's money. It's about supporting creativity, supporting young craftspeople, acting with integrity, and all of these things are really key. And that I think is the future of why people will come to you, because you're more than a store.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up on that, because I totally agree with all of those points. And I think there's another really good brand that has a bit of a synergy with Liberty in this respect, actually. Alexander Mcqueen, that's been doing really interesting things in this respect, because I think, for luxury brands particularly, they've really struggled with how do they have that kind of integrity? What do they legitimately feel they can kind of give over and kind of give of themselves, not just being people that sell? And I think the interesting thing, just in terms of, examples for Alexander Mcqueen, I mean, if you look at the thing I like about it is what it's doing in terms of a series of things, not just doing that one-off. Here, because donating money clearly is good and it's important if you can do it, but it's quite a quick salve. And I think it's what we're going to see post-pandemic is consumers are really, really, what will be at a premium will be expertise, access to things, a sort of sense of brand generosity in it to an extent. And I think with Alexander Mcqueen, what I liked is, you saw last year that they took their top floor of their flagship, which was just for VIP customers beforehand, a very traditional thing for a luxury brand to do. And they turned it over to a space that's kind of half museum and half educational space. So very much for kind of whether it's the London fashion colleges or young designers, to give people a little bit of a glimpse without ruining it, a glimpse behind that kind of velvet rope, that velvet curtain, and helped on a kind of create a bond at a time when, arguably education is in a lot of flux. There's a lot of wobbles there as well. And then, the beginning of this year, they worked with Show Studio and they gifted, Sarah Burton gifted them a downloadable pattern. Show Studio has been doing that for, almost 10 years now. But what was interesting is that they gifted this downloadable pattern. So if you go on that site, you can download it and you can reinterpret that. And if you look on their Instagram, it's amazing the different ways people have, taken that dress. But it was from the Spring Summer 20 collection. So it wasn't like we've dug up something we don't care about. It's like, this is really current. And they gave it over to people and said, you can kind of play with our own codes and get involved. Really kind of a sort of sense of inclusivity without spoiling that really important sense of aspiration that makes you a luxury brand. And I think, looking at what they were doing, and then the pandemic hit, and they've, as you said, those virtual challenges, realizing that you've got a lot of people out here that are feeling, at the moment, feeling very creatively and professionally quite lost. And so saying this is a way for us to kind of create a connection with you and keep that community going, but in a way where we'll actually, and give you a platform, because the people that have done their favourite images that have come out of these creative challenges, they're then posting on their social media site. So I think a lot of these things very much talk to what Madeleine was saying about this sense of access and expertise and creating a community where you can, what can you legitimately do with it? Because I do also agree that, most brands will not have the kind of financial capacity to do that. And actually throwing money at something is probably not something that most consumers really want to see anymore. Actually, they want something on a more personal level will benefit them and the people around them that they feel that they're connected to. So sorry, that was a very long answer, but I feel quite passionate about that as well.
The finances came up there. So I think it's probably worth moving a little bit onto that. And as we're discussing the future of retail, SIRPLUS would probably be in administration. We definitely would have been in administration if we hadn't had the furlough scheme. And I suspect that a lot of businesses are the same, because if you've got quite a few fixed costs and your takings are down by sort of 80%, then it's next to impossible to survive. And that's sort of been an amazing support. And as we start to open up, we're optimistic that sales will come through, but there is the sort of fear that they might not, and people might stay away. And like many other businesses, if we have dramatically reduced sales for a long period, or if there is a second peak and we go into another lockdown around Christmas, which is for all of us the most important part, then there's going to be major insolvencies. And then when it gets to February, March, when all of us are going to have to pay very, very significant VAT bills to the taxman, there are going to be other challenges there. So whilst it's exciting to talk about, being out of lockdown and what we envisage for the future of retail, the future of retail, could be quite challenging. Thinking about how we're going to make our stores more techy could seem in a few months' time like a luxury that we sort of thought that is a consideration. It could simply be, how can we get enough cash to keep the business afloat?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think what is coming is the biggest recession that we've ever experienced, and so clearly consumer behaviour is going to change. Retail is going to be extraordinarily challenging in the year ahead, and potentially for a foreseeable time into the future. I think what I would say on the technology front is that for too long it's been viewed as a luxury, when actually the kind of tools that we're talking about embedding that could be embedded now will actually be vital to the success of so many retailers going forward. Clearly not everyone, and everyone will have a different way of different technologies that could be applied. And so I think we need to urge caution in just using the spread word of technology to describe some of the things we're talking about. But for too long, we've been using gut instinct in retail to make judgment calls, when clearly data and artificial intelligence can lead us to make much more informed choices about consumer behavior and how best to deliver product to consumers when they need it. And that has to be the future of retail. I mean, clearly when stores reopen, and if you've got social distancing measures within store and you're operating at potentially a quarter of your previous numbers in store, that is going to be extraordinarily difficult to manage. So,
yeah, I think the way to do it is to kind of put it into segments, like what can we do now, and what does our customer, what will make the journey easier for our customer now, and what can we start building and planning in for the next. Because fit tech and all this kind of stuff, we're talking about huge amounts of behind the scenes work that needs to go on in your e-commerce. We're just relaunched our e-commerce actually, but it's a project that we started a year ago. Replatforming your website does not happen overnight. Making everything it doesn't happen straight away. This takes time. So it's about what can we do in the immediate that makes it easier for everyone and makes it engaging and interesting and emotive and an experience. We mustn't forget that, but also easy to get to the product that you want. And then what can we start planning for the next? Because we can't just flick our fingers and everything happens straight away, especially not now with all the other difficulties and constraints that we have. So we're very fortunate that we started working on something that we can launch at a time that e-commerce is so unbelievably important. We're kind of pleased with ourselves for no particular reason apart from just coincidence. But it's a beautiful site, and I think it's going to absolutely change our e-commerce again. So, but we're very thankful that that's the way that it's rolled out.
Madeleine, are you able to tell us a little bit more, like what is different, or what does the new site look like?
Yes, well, also we have just relaunched our branding. So we've relaunched our logo. We've got an entirely new alphabet. We have changed our crest. We've changed our packaging. We've gone through this amazing process, which is I've just worked with Pentagram, who are amazing design creatives. And it was an extraordinary process of going through our archive. We turn 145 years old this year. So we've gone back into our archive, which is a physical archive of, we used to do silverware and catalogs and fabrics, through to our print archive, where we have 45,000 prints, which we still reference every day out of our design studios. And we found all our old logos, and we put all our old logos across an entire wall. I mean, there are immeasurable amount of them. They're extraordinary. And we actually discovered our best logo was the one that's hanging above our door. So we've actually gone back in time and reworked, and with Pentagram kind of changed the design and made it slightly more modern. And we have our old new logo. And And with that was an entire kind of design guidelines that we put together that the website's been built against. So it's really fresh, it's really modern, but it still harks back to the things that we find hold really true to Liberty. So it's an incredibly exciting time for us, where we're actually really looking to the future. We're relaunching our website, we're relaunching our branding. We've started, again, before lockdown, we started a restoration project on the entire building, which is a grade 2 star listed building. And we are taking it back to how it was built 100 years ago, which is just the most daunting and brilliant project to be a part of. And all of this is happening during lockdown. So we've not been short of things to do, and they're all being realized now. So we're on the tide of excitement, but also reality of what this new normal is. And we don't all know that yet. So I think all we can do is carry on, best foot forward, embracing whatever we can that can help us on our journey, but also staying in the present. And I think that's quite, with an eye to the future, I think is quite important.
I'd like to mention on the staying in the present thing, because it's interesting to bring up a brand that's, Henry, sort of to your point, smaller brands. If I mention a smaller brand, one thing that I think has been really successful with shoppers during let's say brand fans during lockdown, is companies that really have been monitoring what's happening, the tone of voice, and the kind of the arc that's been going on. It's been a real roller coaster for people. And at the beginning, I think, there was almost a kind of, this is awful and weird and crazy, but there's a certain sort of solidarity of the adrenaline buzz where everyone's like, oh, everything's different now.
Completely. And I think because we are running out of time, maybe we could conclude by just, like, in today's changing world, what would you say a positive retail experience looks like? What excites you all about the future of shopping, and what can consumers expect? Maybe we could start with you, Henry.
Yeah. So for me, it's a case of probably at the moment educating people on what we're doing to make sure that we're creating a safe environment, and then once we've done that, trying to make it as fun as possible. So great interactions, great music in the stores, friendly salespeople. We can't give people coffees, but we can sort of do whatever else we can to make their experience nice. And that's what it comes down to. It has to be an enjoyable experience, because at the moment people can shop anywhere, and brands will be struggling to get customers into their shops or on their website, and people don't have to go to a store. It has to be enjoyable for them to do so.
For me, I think retail has been challenged and on the cusp of change for a really long time, as has the entire fashion industry, and we've all been dragging our feet. And this has really been a turning point for all of us, where we're going to have to step up. We're going to have to realize what people want. We're going to have to listen to the customer and make the experience worth making the effort for. And whether that be physical or digital, it has to answer the call that's been out there for a long time.
What about you, Matthew? What excites you about the future of retail? What do you think customers can look forward to? What can they expect?
I think, to echo Madeleine, that complete shift in behaviour in retail and beginning to offer a much more significant choice to consumers, where we begin to question everything about how we consume and what we consume. So alongside physical product, let's explore digital product and digital experiences, and begin to offer something which has all of those moments of excitement. Because look, let's face it, none of us need anything more. We've probably got enough. If we want something, we're going to have to feel that magical emotional connection to it. And we can use some extraordinary technologies to begin to create those moments, both at a small scale and a much larger one as well.
I would say the thing that's exciting me is, I love retail because it's brand culture to me. It's culture in a way. It's rarefied culture. It's pop culture, and we're going to see a real unshackling of the restraints with this situation, because people are going to have to adapt. shoppers are going to want to have a much more exciting, a much more personable experience in store. So I think looking at people deliver the human factor in a way that uses all their channels is going to be really exciting. I'm really excited to see how people create ecosystems where people can enjoy your store space, then take a chunk of that away, think about it, come back to you, speak to you somewhere else. I think that kind of synchronization is really, really exciting. And ultimately, I think, this is a time when retailers know, whether it's looking at how people have reacted to celebrities on social media or brands themselves, there is no place really for things that don't inspire or entertain or educate in some way. So I think that kind of combination of things is what everybody should be thinking about.
Absolutely. And I think that's the perfect note to wrap up our conversation. I think you're right. What most of you have said is that times like these, they might be tough, but a lot of innovation and really positive shifts can come out of it. And like even though retail is changing, I think there's still so many exciting developments to come.